Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of the screen, which will reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. This week I have tidbits. I also want to give you an update on my new vintage project that I started working on. And then I want to do a roundup of Finish It February and all of those who participated in all the great projects that were finished, frogged, or fixed this year. So let's get started. So this first tidbit came up in my Instagram feed. I follow Clara Parks on Instagram. She is not a prolific Instagram poster, which is fine, but when she does post, it's usually something pretty good. So if you don't know who Clara Parks is, she wrote a column or a website or a blog post called Knitter's Review for years, and I think you can still read all of those. And she is really, that's what she does, is write about yarn. I have two of her books. One is called The Knitter's Book of Yarn, and it goes through different types of yarn, like a single yarn versus a two-ply, and how they're constructed and what sorts of projects those are good for. And she even includes different projects that would use that type of yarn. So Clara is really an expert on wool. So I've seen her speak a couple of times at different conferences. I've taken a class from her at a retreat once. It's probably now it's almost a year and a half. She published a book called Vanishing Fleeced, which is about the wool industry here in the US, and this project that she had of buying this bale of wool and then figuring out how to take it through the entire sort of supply chain of getting it processed and turned into yarn. And that's what this book was about. So what she is going to be doing is on March 10th, she is going to be giving a talk on the YouTube channel of a yarn shop that I believe is on the West Coast called Tolt. And it's about wool and different wool yarns that are currently available and the different types. And what the yarn shop has done is they've created little swatch packs so that you can experience each of the different types of yarns that Clara is going to be talking about. So these are yarns that are currently available on the market, at least here in the US. So they just announced that earlier this week, and then if you wanted to get the swatch pack in time to see Clara's talk, you needed to order it by, I think it was yesterday, to guarantee that you would be getting it on time. But they're going to keep her live stream on the YouTube channel of the yarn shop that she's doing this in conjunction with. They'll keep that on their website. So if this is something you're interested in watching, you can watch it even if you don't have the yarn, and you can learn something about it. And then if you do want to experience the yarns, I don't know how long that yarn shop will continue to stock these swatch packs, but I will leave their contact information down in the video description. So if it's something that you're interested in now or even later after seeing the live stream, then you can pursue that yourself. This second tidbit came up in my Twitter feed earlier this week. It actually came up in my Twitter feed a couple of months ago, and I did talk about it. But at the time, it was an announcement that there's going to be a week-long sort of online event called Textiles from the Home, and it's through the University of Wisconsin's Department of Material Culture, is I believe what the name of it is. So a couple of months ago, they were putting out a call for papers, and now they're presenting the schedule of what the events are. And it's going to be March 14th to 20th, and all of the times that are listed on the website are Central Daylight Time. Here in the US, we're going to start daylight saving time on March 14th, which is the first day of this program. But a lot of the rest of the world does not start daylight saving time for another month. So they have a converter there for time zones so that you can figure out when they're going to be. And they're trying to make sure that all of the different presentations and conversations are at different times of the day to try to allow as many people from all over the world to participate as they can. So it's different kinds of topics about the making of textiles from home and throughout history, I believe. So I will leave a link to the Textiles from the Home website, and then you can see the program at a glance. They were still getting registration information put up a couple of days ago. It was taking some time to get all of it up, so it should be up soon. And it's because it's online, I don't think there's going to be a limit to how many people can do it. So again, that's going to be March 14th through the 20th. So this next tidbit is just an announcement that I will probably be doing a live stream again this weekend. It's nothing to get super excited about. Basically, it's just a technology experiment with some new equipment that I'm getting. And so we want to just experiment and make sure that it's all going to work. And I thought, oh, I could do another unboxing video. I received this box in the mail yesterday. It's from another person in the Minnesota Knitters Guild. So I've been talking the past couple months about how our guild started doing online knitting, social knitting, a couple of times a month. So there's one that's on Sundays from 11 to 1, and then every other Sunday, and then every other Thursday there's one in the evenings. So I've been going to both of those because I've been really missing talking to other knitters. And so some knitters only go to one or the other, but there are a few people who go to both of them like I do. And one of them is a woman named Sue from Wisconsin, and she heard me talking in the social group about vintage knitting, and she sent me a message and said, would you be interested in some vintage pattern books that I have? I don't want them. I'm trying to get, clear things out of my house, and if you would like them, I'm happy to send them to you. And so I know that there's some that are 1940s, and then there are different time periods. And I said, I'd love to. So that's the only thing I know is that this box contains vintage patterns. I have no idea other than that. So I thought it might be fun to just do an unboxing while I'm testing out my equipment. It's probably not going to be a very long live stream. And I don't know exactly what time it's going to be. My equipment that I was waiting to get is supposed to come this afternoon. And if that's true and we can get it working, then that will be fantastic. So what this equipment does, right now I'm using this camera that I typically use to talk to face to the camera, or when I do my overhead for technique videos and things like that. I use the same camera for both of those. And I have this a pole right here with a horizontal pole coming out this way that I can mount that camera on for my overhead shots, and I can zoom in and zoom out, and it's been really great. I haven't been able to use that camera for overhead shooting with live stream videos because when you look at this camera at the display, there's always information that shows on the display that doesn't show on the image later. But when the camera is hooked up to the computer and I'm live streaming, you would see all of that, that data on the screen. So I haven't been able to use this camera. I've been having to use a webcam that's hooked up to this clamp that's attached to a movable table that we wheel into here when I'm doing live streams, and it gets in my way. So when somebody asked a question a couple of weeks ago in a live stream and they wanted to know about my favorite reference books, normally I would just hop up, go get them, and come right back because it's just a few feet away. I couldn't get at them because this other desk is in the way. So I'm hoping to solve a couple of different problems, and so this camera will be the same one that I will use for all overhead recording or for live stream videos as well. And that's what I'm going to be testing out this weekend. So it'll be just kind of a test, and I will probably announce it maybe 15 minutes ahead of time. So if you happen to be in the YouTube app or something, you might catch it. But just wanted to let you know that that would be happening this weekend in case you're interested. So just a reminder that if you would like me to answer a question that you have about a project you're working on, or if you have a question about something that I have done or something that I have said, I am always happy to answer those questions, but I do ask that you post them to my Ravelry group so that other people can see the questions and answers and they can learn from them and even participate in them. Because sometimes people ask me questions that I really don't have an answer to, other than, well, here's how I'd approach trying to get an answer. But other people in the group do have experience with that and they are able to answer those questions. It doesn't mean you can't ever send me a private message. Like Sue, who was asking me if I wanted the vintage books, that was obviously something that made the most sense to talk to me about in a private message. But if it's a question about a project or how to do something in knitting, a technique of some sort, it's really best to ask me in my Ravelry group. So I started my vintage sweater, my next vintage sweater project, which is a 1960s sweater that came in a kit that included the yarn and also fabric. I actually bought 3 different kits, and I'm using a pattern from one of the kits in order to knit yarn from a different kit. So there's a little bit difference in the yarns in those 2 kits in terms of the stitch gauge that they should be worked at, and so I had to go through the pattern and confirm that I could knit the pattern using the appropriate stitch gauge for the yarn that I'm actually using, and that I could use the stitch counts for a smaller size in order to end up with the size I actually want. So rather than knitting a size 38 with a yarn that gets 8 stitches per inch, I'm knitting a size 36 with yarn that gets 7.5 stitches per inch. And so because I'm using the stitch counts for the size 36 and my stitches are actually bigger, I'm going to end up with a sweater that will fit a size 38 bust. But I had to go through and check all the numbers and make sure everything was going to work out. So these kits, they came with yarn and then they came with coordinated wool fabric that was hand woven in like the Scottish border towns. I have always planned to sew a skirt to coordinate with the sweater. Now these kits don't come with a skirt pattern. So I spent some time the other day trying to figure out what a 1960s skirt would be like. I mean, I can remember I was born in the early 60s, and so by 1969, I remember what skirts were like, and that is not a skirt length I am going to be wearing at my age. So I'm not going to be wearing a micro mini skirt. So it's probably more in line of a skirt from the end or in the middle of the 1960s, or a skirt that like your school teacher would have worn. Even if she was a young woman, it would have been a little longer. So I was kind of deciding that it has to be a simple skirt. The amount of wool that they give you in these kits varies 27 inches to 28 inches in width, and then they give you 1 3/4 yards, and that's what they considered a skirt length. So as I've looked at different brands of these kits, as I found out other names of them, and as I've met other knitters who say, oh, I have one of those kits, a friend of mine found one at a garage store. Sometimes the fabric came in 54-inch widths and you'd get a yard of it. So it's about the same amount of wool, it's just configured a little bit differently. I've been thinking about this and you know, trying to make sure that I picked a skirt that made sense. And so the other day I started looking for vintage skirt patterns, like from a pattern company, like maybe I'd just buy a vintage pattern. And what I found was they were all based on a particular waist size. Like the pattern was for 24-inch waist or 26-inch waist. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I learned to sew probably in the early 70s, and I don't remember patterns only being for one size. They always had several sizes. So that surprised me. And then I was thinking about not wanting to destroy this tissue paper sewing pattern. And I thought there has to be something online that would teach me just how to do a A-line skirt, because it's pretty easy type of skirt. So I was looking on YouTube. I found a couple of good videos that just gave me an idea of how you draft your own pattern for an A-line skirt. And then I remembered that I actually have a subscription, a premium subscription to Craftsy. When Craftsy got bought out by another company, it was Craftsy, and then it was Blueprint, and then another company that's actually here in the Twin Cities that has a lot of online video classes in different categories. They bought Blueprint, and they are now calling it Craftsy again. And because I had been a member previously, they gave me a deal on an annual subscription of like $30 or something for like unlimited for a year. So I pay like $2.50 a month, and I haven't used it in the past few months since I've gotten the subscription. I thought I'm going to go look on there and see what they have for sewing, because I've never looked for sewing. I used Craftsy when I was learning to spin. And so I found several good classes for spinning on there, but I'd never looked at anything else. And there are a lot of classes on sewing. And I found one that was specifically on drafting a pattern for an A-line skirt, and then all these different variations. You could do pockets, and you could do interfacing for the top, or you could do a lining, or you could do, you know, this or that or the other thing. And one of the things that she was talking about, you know, and they teach you how to draft the pattern and how to do a mock-up, and to make sure everything's going to fit you, and how you tweak it and how you do all this. It's to me, it's just like so fascinating. So, because I was always, just like I was when as a knitter in the old days, was I had to follow the pattern and I didn't know how to modify it. It was like, okay, I'm going to make this, and then either it's going to fit or it's not. But now I know a lot about knitting, and I can design or modify and do all that. But I'd never gone back to sewing and to learn how to do that with sewing clothes. And so this has been so interesting to me. One of the things that she talked about, though, was after you do your mock-up, your muslin, using muslin fabric, after you do that, that you do your first skirt in like a cotton quilting fabric or something like that, because those are easy to use. And she was talking about how wool and silk and linen and those kinds of fabrics can be more difficult to work with. And I kind of knew that about silk, but it never occurred to me that wool might be tricky to work with. And I thought, I can't afford to make mistakes with this. This is how much wool I have. There is no more, and it's hand woven. I don't want to mess it up. I'm probably going to do a couple of mock-up, and then make a couple of skirts. And I might even buy some inexpensive wool fabric and just practice on that. But one of the other things I realized yesterday was that this fabric is not just houndstooth. It's got the bright blue, it forms like these squares. And I thought, oh, I probably need to think about pattern matching on the sides. And so I've been looking at that too. And let me tell you, this is one of those things where I had the same feeling that I had when my eyes kind of opened up about knitting when I started the Master Hand Knitting program. And they're like, you know, I was looking off in this direction. Oh, I don't know what to do. And they kind of took me by the shoulders and said, no, look over there. Look at all these books. Look at all these techniques. And here's how you learn. And it just opened my eyes, and it completely changed my knitting life. And that's kind of how the excitement that I was feeling yesterday was like, oh, they're revealing the secrets of sewing to me right here. And it was so exciting. So I'm feeling a lot more confident about my path to making this skirt, because I want this to be a nice skirt to go with this particular sweater. And the other thing will be that I, at some point, may also make a skirt to go with my 1930s sweater. And because I feel like that sweater is just a little too short for me, it hits me exactly like it's supposed to. It ends right at the natural waistline, but none of my clothes come up to my natural waistline. Everything is a little bit lower than that. And so I really need to have something that comes up higher on my body, so that when I wear that particular sweater, I don't have a big gap in the back that's between the top of my pants and the bottom of my sweater. So it was very helpful. I was very excited. I was watching sewing all day. And what was really interesting to me is that because this sweater is in stockinette, I thought I was going to be bored to tears. I did a spreadsheet. I always do a spreadsheet before I start knitting a project in order to, for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that I like to do is calculate the total number of stitches that the item has, because that tells me about how long it's going to take me to knit. Not in terms of how many hours is it going to take me to knit, but in terms of elapsed time, like how many weeks it might take me to knit, because I know from doing these spreadsheets that on average I will do about 2,200 stitches a day or 12 to 15,000 in a week, and that coincides with the fact that I easily knit a sock in a week. I can knit a sock in a couple of days, but then I don't want to knit for a few days. So that's why it all averages out. So I was calculating this tiny, tiny gauge for this sweater, and I knew it was going to be a lot, but I just hadn't thought about that it's going to be close to 100,000 stitches. It's going to be close to twice the number of stitches that it would take to knit a worsted weight sweater of the same style. And I looked at that and I thought, this is going to take me forever, because I have like a 3 to 4 week tolerance for knitting on the same thing. And this is like, that would be like 2 sweaters worth of knitting in this thing. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to take me months and months and months to get this thing done. So yesterday when I'm watching these sewing videos, I always am streaming video while I'm knitting, but there's very much a stop and go thing, because if I decide I want to look at the screen, I usually have to stop what I'm knitting, because I often knit very complex items where I have to pay attention and see what I'm doing. This is stockinette, and I was just, I would be knitting along and I'd be watching what was going on. I got so much knitting done, I couldn't believe it. So it's possible that I will get this done much faster than I had anticipated. We'll see if it's just the early days of enthusiasm for a brand new project, or if I'm going to be able to get through this faster than I originally thought. But that was a very exciting revelation to me, was to see how much knitting I could do in a day, and also that my wrists weren't tired. I think these needles are slightly bigger than I usually use when I'm working in fingering weight yarn, because when I'm knitting socks with fingering weight, I'm using a much firmer gauge in order to make the socks hold up. But I'm knitting a sweater gauge with this, and so it's a little bit bigger needle, and I don't have just that kind of resistance. The needles aren't as small, and I just feel really good knitting it. So that is making me really happy about that. One of the things in the skirt class, so I took a skirt class on the Craftsy. It was by a woman named Deborah Moebes. She had a list of resources in the classes, like in online resources and various different places to get supplies. And she mentioned in her list about it's called, I think it's pronounced Wawak or Wawak. I'll put it on the screen. Sewing supplies. It's a company that's been around for over 100 years. You can buy things in bulk, or you can buy things, just one or something. I wanted to buy a couple of different zippers for skirts, so I bought a couple of different blue zippers, hoping to get one that's going to match, the fabric pretty well, but not knowing exactly which color. But the zippers were like 47 cents or something. Like, I thought, how could that be that inexpensive? So I bought different supplies that I thought I would need that were very inexpensive. They've already shipped it, and it's going to be here Monday. So I'm going to be able to get started on drafting my pattern and doing the mock-up and all that. So that is very exciting to me. When I did my swatch for this sweater, I'm going to do an overhead on this, because I kind of want to explain to you why my swatch looks kind of weird, and the kinds of things that I'm looking to solve. One of the things that I like to do in vintage patterns is follow the instructions, like the construction methods, follow them to see what I think of the result. And if I think I can get a better result using more contemporary techniques or maybe doing something a slightly different way, then I'll do an experiment with what I think might work. And sometimes my idea is better, and sometimes the way that they have written it is like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And so I want to learn what their technique, the way that they've presented it, what the value is of that. And then experiment with changing it if I can get a better result or not. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I was swatching for and some of the things that I am thinking about in terms of problem solving. So if you look at the pattern, you can see that at the bottom you cast on for this Knit 1 Pro 1 ribbing, and you knit it, they want it to be knit for a couple of inches. And then what they want you to do, and you're knitting with smaller needles when you're doing the ribbing. And so when you're getting ready to switch to the stockinette, you put these 12 stitches right here on hold. So you put them on waste yarn or some kind of a stitch holder. And then you switch to the larger needle and you just work in the stockinette. And you work it all the way up to the top. And then you work this decrease line here. And that is what I was simulating here in my swatch. So that's what I was simulating here. I was simulating, okay, I'm working the bottom ribbing, I put this on hold, and then I started working this, and I did the decrease line. So then I came back to the ribbing and I worked it straight up for a little bit until it was time to do the shaping. And so the way the shaping is done for this ribbing is it's done at the same rate that the decreasing was done. And so it's like two rows out of every 3 you do a decrease, and they have you do it a few stitches in from the edge. So you have the selvage is plain, the second stitch is plain, and then you work the decrease by working the 3rd and 4th stitches together. Where with the ribbing, you get to the end of the row and you're doing a knit front back in the last stitch. And then of course, these are on 2 different needle sizes. So the way that the ribbing is, it's going to have to be what they call slightly stretched in order to fit along there. And then that's going to be what helps the ribbing kind of pull over and open up at the neck without bunching up. Well, at the end, you're going to have to sew these things together. And so I have been thinking about what might work rather than having to work these 2 pieces separately and then seam them together. So I'm definitely going to try this. But one of the things I'm also concerned about is the fact that when you separate these 2 pieces, you have a selvage here and a selvage here. And that means when you are seaming the button band to the body, you're going to lose a stitch from the button band and you're going to lose a stitch from the body. So you're losing 2 stitches, but you're going to lose 2 stitches on the other button band and body as well. That's 4 stitches. And in the original gauge of 8 stitches per inch, that would be ½ an inch. Well, you also are losing a stitch at the side, one on the front, one on the back. That's another 2 stitches. And then over on the other side, one on the front, one on the back. So altogether, you're going to lose 8 stitches, which is a full inch of stitch loss. So I am trying to figure out a way to avoid that stitch loss here. You know, one of the things I was thinking about was that when I separate these and I need to start working the stockinette portion, that I would cast on a stitch at the beginning so that I'd have an extra stitch here. And then when I come back to work the button band later, that I would cast on an extra stitch at the end. And that way, when I eliminated those 2 extra stitches, I wouldn't lose any of the other stitches. So I wouldn't actually lose a ½ an inch across the front. And then the other thing that I want to think about is if there's a way to pick up stitches at the rate that they would have been increased, pick up stitches along this edge, work back in the ribbing pattern, and then work in short rows. So because it's a weird increase rate, I have to figure out if it's going to look right, and I also have to figure out exactly how I would do those short rows so that I would get 4 extra stitches every 6 rows. I think I know how that might work, but these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. I want to try the way that it's written and learn from that and see how well I like that, and then try a different way of doing it based on the approach that I might be wanting to make in a contemporary pattern, and then see which one gives me the best result. Sunday was the last day of February, which means that was the last day of Finish It February. It doesn't mean that those of you who are participating can't keep working on projects that you want to finish, but it does wrap up the month of finishing. And so what I wanted to do was to go through the Ravelry thread for Finish It February, where people were posting the things that they had finished throughout the month, and then share those with you. So it's a week by week roundup of all of the things that you guys completed. And it's only about 7.5 minutes long. If you want to speed it up, you can use your settings in your YouTube settings. If you tap or mouse over, you can reveal that little gear, and you can change the playback speed if you want to go through it faster. It was really fun to see some of the really amazingly beautiful things that you guys knit. So that's what we're going to be ending this week's Casual Friday with. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.